So, hello everybody. I am Llewellyn Falco. Uh, I am an agile technical coach, which means that, like, in my day job, I sit with teams of programmers at companies, and we program together, and we learn how to program together better. And one of the main tools I use in that is mob programming. Which is something that sort of came from a collaboration with me and Woody Zuhl. At the time, we didn't know about mob programming. We had discovered this thing called Coding Dojo that a group was doing out in Paris that I learned about at the Agile 2009 conference in Chicago from Laurent. And we were very excited about that. And then we modified that to strong style programming or strong style pairing, which is a thing I invented. And we would just do it as a way to learn. And at the time, it didn't occur to us that something that was so useful to do at, code camps and stuff for learning might be useful in production. It just didn't occur to us. We just thought of this as, this is a way to practice, this is a way to train, this is a way to get better. When Woody started doing it at Hunter and started doing it in production, I think everybody was just amazed at how productive this style of programming can be. Later on, there was this sort of realization that maybe we are in an industry where, learning a lot is how you be productive. Like those are not coincidental things, coincidental things. Those are actual direct consequences of what we were doing. I'm going to take you through a mob we did on Tuesday with a group of, well, it was 8 people total, 7, not including myself as facilitator. And in this thing, I actually play 3 different roles. And the majority of what we're going to talk about today is facilitator. But I wanted to call these out because I am doing different things that are relevant in these 3 roles. So the first is facilitator, and that is I am just getting the mob to mob, right? I'm working on making the mob correctly. I am encouraging behaviors that I want. I am squashing behaviors that I don't want. But I'm just doing what I would consider people stuff, right? And you can be a great mob facilitator with no technical understanding or domain understanding whatsoever of what you're working in. You don't not need to have anything other than the people stuff. But I do think that the people stuff is actually a sort of an important part of being a facilitator, right? Like this is where those skills are actually required. And the extra stuff is just bonuses. I am also in this case being a product owner. So one of the things that often happens when you do a mob is you do a sort of practice problem or a kata. And I love katas. I think they're really wonderful and really good. But I also enjoy the times where we don't do a kata. And so I wanted to do one here. Now that's not to say like I didn't choose a simple problem. I did, and I purposely did. But we chose a real problem. We worked on a real open source project, and we actually committed our changes to master when we were done, right? So just to like put that in context, we took 7 people who had not worked together, put them in a project that they had not worked on, and created new functionality and got it committed to master branch of an open source project within 2.5 hours. Right? Like that's amazing, right? But that also means like it was my open source project, and so like I had good understanding of what I wanted, and I had opinions that on what I wanted the product to look like that were going to be upheld, right? Like this is what I want, this is what I will accept as product owner. And you'll see times where I enforce these and times where like I'm playing that role of product owner. And then I'm also acting as a capacity of coach or a team lead, right? And so when you are a coach or a team lead, the difference I think between coach and team lead is just whether or not you are also a player, right? So in both situations, you should have deep understanding of like the game you are playing. In this case, our game is programming in Java. The team lead is part of the team, but he's still educating and growing the rest of the thing. So the coaching title is a little less formal. The coach is usually sitting there where it's like the entire validity of what I do is not in me doing it myself, but in the other players doing it better without me, right? So I'm living sort of vicariously through them. But in both situations, you're going to see this hat also come in play. And I want to show sort of, anyhow, the point being, I'm doing all three of these hats, and I'm going to talk about it in context of these hats. So I just wanted to define these three roles up front because it can get a little blurry when we're in the middle of it. All right, and let me jump out of this for a second. I think I'm going to now start just going off book. We've already talked about this, we talked about that, we talked about, yeah. Okay, so now let's just go into the video itself. Actually, before we go into the video, let's talk about how we even do this. I have noticed that there are sort of three different ways that mobbing remotely occurs, right? And so way number one, and this is a way I use actually quite a lot on companies because a lot of times the environment is just not set up at all for any kind of decent mobbing situation. So what I do is I have one person and they're going to be the driver. They're going to be the typist. And we open up their computer and we share their screen and we don't let them participate other than typing for the entire session, right? They are just the designated typist for the round. And then next time we meet, so the next time we get together, we rotate who the typist is. So we're still rotating, but we're rotating the typist really on a long schedule. A variation of that I'll do if I have like a fairly well performing team is we might do like a round or even 2 rounds and then rotate the typist. So rather than rotating every 3 to 4 minutes, we're rotating who's at keyboard every 40 to hour and a half, right? But the person who's talking, they're still rotating very frequently. Let me actually, I skipped over that because everyone was raising their hand, but let's not skip over that. Let's define that a little bit better. So basics of mobbing. So this is what it looks like back when we could meet in person. So you have one person at the keyboard. We usually refer to them as the driver, but for today, I'm actually going to refer to them as the typist because I think it's just clearer. And one of the things I've noticed is when you're remote, simpler words is an advantage, right? So we're going to have the typer. And the rule at the keyboard is always going to be no thinking at the keyboard. So the typist is allowed to type, but they're not allowed to think. So with that, we're going to need someone who is doing the thinking, and that's going to be the talker, right? Again, repurposing navigator to talker because it's just clearer in the roles. And then there's this thing that is occurring, like here you can see this guy is the navigator and this lady is the talker, and this person is about to become the talker, and this person is 2 away from the talker, right? Or here, this person is talking and this person is typing and this person is going to be next. And this person is 2 from next. And we were getting this for free. And I would talk about it in the before times, but I don't think I had a good understanding of just how important this was, right? Because one of the things is like this person who's talking, this person is really paying attention right now, right? Because every single person is looking at them. But this next person is also really paying attention because they know they're about to be nixed. When we went to virtual, this became harder to see. It became harder to realize where you were in the line. And so something I recently realized is, as a facilitator, I needed to bring that mechanic back into the virtual mobs. And I want to show you how that plays out in the mob we did yesterday. Okay, so let me bring this up, and we are going to 550. Let's see if playing the video actually works well. All right, so here, I think everyone can see my mouse. Here we have the mob timer. This is the software that we're going to use to track who's there. And the very first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to have each participant put their name into the timer. And this goes to a concept that is really important as a facilitator to be aware of. Sorry, let me go and pull these things up. EC2. Oh, I skipped over talking about how we set up stuff. Right. Sorry about that. Let me come back. So traditionally, we see computers looking at one person's screen. So just like you're doing, literally what we're doing right now, right? Everybody is looking at my screen, right? And right now I'm typing and stuff, but it's almost always the person typing, wherever they're typing, that's the screen you want everyone to see. Now, sometimes what will happen is this person who's typing will switch. So it'll become the second person, the third person, the fourth person, and you'll rotate. And in almost all mobs where I see that occur, what is happening is they're using some variation, whether it's automatically programmed or not, of committing frequently to source control and pulling frequently from source control, right? So maybe you're doing that manually where you're on a branch and you just commit and the next person pulls, or maybe you're using some software like Mob, which is doing that for you on a timer. So the timer goes off, it commits for you, pushes, pulls, handles the merging and stuff. But you're moving the code around to the different code bases, right? And that has the advantage that you don't just have one person typing the whole time, but it has the disadvantage that you have a whole bunch of different environments. It's a little bit complicated to set up, and it encourages slightly longer times at the computer. So this is not what we did. What we did is we used the cloud setup. And I'll put a link to this on our page. So, oh, thank you, whoever has been adding to this. Setup. Feel free to move that as needed. So what we did is we put a server out in the clouds, and because our mob was mainly in Europe, I actually put this EC2 server in Frankfurt, meaning that like the latency between the computer and the people who were remoting in was really low, low enough that basically everyone felt like they were typing on their own computer. And I find that to be a really important, yeah, thumbs up there from Marco, is one of the people who is in the mob. That's a really important experience because even a little bit of lag makes typing really frustrating and makes a lot of the things the IDE will do for you basically just non-existent. So we're doing that. We're doing that in Amazon. This has a lot of advantages. My bandwidth is sometimes very flaky, but Amazon's bandwidth is amazing, right? And everybody's using Amazon's bandwidth. They're not really using mine. So if I get in trouble, it doesn't really affect the rest of the group, right? They can continue without issue, without interruption. And the other advantage is it means everyone's using the same tooling, right? So I had to set up a server for that. that took about 20 minutes to set up, and I'll show you sort of how I did it. So first, let's go here to the management console. So this is Amazon's management console. The cloud service you use doesn't really matter, right? I just happen to be using Amazon. Like I said, we did this one in Frankfurt. So I'll switch over to that locale. And then I use this instance. So it's a T2 large. So it's not a free instance, but I think it's something like 10 cents a minute or something. We did a 4-hour mob, so this is costing me upwards of 50 cents to run. One of the great things about having your dev environment on the cloud is it's just super cheap because you're only paying for the time you actually use. And unlike a regular server that's on 24/7, like you're just not deving 24/7. And then we're using a program called AnyDesk that allows all of us to remote to it. Now to set this up, right? Because when you turn it on, you just get a Windows 2019 server. I used a script. And so I am doing Java in this particular one. So I have a script with my starter project. And basically, I just copy this line. Let me put that into the notes. Start up script. And so basically I just copy this line and I run it. And this uses a fairly well-known pattern of make a web request, download this web page, and then pipe it in and execute whatever in that page, right? And this is the page. So the first thing it does is it installs Chocolatey. It also turns on my audio, which most of the time cloud services don't use audio because why would you? But in this particular case, I really want the audio service for the timer, which makes a little audible bell when it occurs. We'll talk about that as a facilitator in a moment. Well, in a long moment, maybe like 10 or 20 minutes. Then I use Chocolatey again to install what I would consider just sort of the base things that everybody should install, right? So VS Code is sort of a text editor. It can be just useful to have on your computer. Windows No is for like a server. It turns off all the things like all the security things that you really want on an actual server, but you absolutely do not want on a dev machine, right? So like, let me connect to the websites, let me download content, that kind of stuff. Git, you should be using Git. GitHub Desktop is a Git client. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. AnyDesk, which we're using to connect, and then Chrome, which is just a web browser, but a nice web browser. And then there isn't a Chocolatey release for that mob timer. So this is just going to open up a web process, a web browser for us where we can download and install that. That one we're going to have to do manually. And then it also Chocolatey installs the things that are specific to the project I'm working on right now, right? Notepad++, which is arguably maybe should be part of the common tools. I think that's a useful anything. Beyond Compare is a diff editor, a diff tool, which is specifically useful in approval tests. JDK 8, which is the Java version that we're developing against. IntelliJ, which is our IDE that we're going to program in. And then Maven, which is a build component for Java. All of this occurs, by the way, without any interaction on my side. It just, the script does it. No questions, stuff like that. With the exception of I do have to interact with a web browser to do this. Next, I clone the repo that I'm at. And then this one I'm actually not taking advantage of at the moment, but it also will set the background wallpaper. And that can be really useful to make sure you realize which machine you're on if you have multiple cloud machines, right? So just having a, like is really clear, this one is the blue machine, this one is the green machine, whatever the particular wallpaper you're using is, that one is super useful. And then it just clears the screen and tells me that it's done. And that just is to make it really obvious that it's done its job. So this process from absolutely nothing to my virtual machine is up and running took about 20 to 30 minutes, right? Next. First thing we're going to do is the mob timer. Now, as a facilitator, I want to point out a more meta thing of what I'm about to do, which is very often when you are introducing something, right? And this also is true for as a coach, right? But in this particular case, what I'm introducing is not programming specific, but it is mob mechanics specific, right? And I guess I just want to say outright that there is a skill to being able to mob well. And a lot of times we don't recognize that as a skill because it doesn't look like the skills that we normally use in programming. It looks like talking and listening, which a lot of times we don't think of as a skill that you might actually need to practice, which is one of the reasons you might need to practice it because a lot of times programmers haven't. And so the skill I want to do here is I want to show them how to rotate. Now, I have seen Woody Zuhl do this live when he just teaches mobbing, where he will just have the group stand up and rotate chairs and sit down, and stand up and rotate chairs and sit down. And I have used that exact technique. I usually don't do it as productive or proactively. I usually wait until there's a problem before I do it live. But I've absolutely stopped a mob mid-sentence and said, okay, we are going to practice rotating because you guys are having problems rotating. And so here, where everything is remote, is just harder. And so making that pause to focus down on a very specific skill is a very useful technique as both a coach and a facilitator. And so anytime you're like, I have this little thing and it should only take a little bit of time, I want to introduce it. Now, and this gets to a general concept of going from 0 to 1. And this is going to come up over and over again. But the first time you do anything, expect it to take an order of magnitude longer. Meaning, I would expect you to take as much time to do something the first time as it takes you to do the next 10 times you do it. And we're going to see like a version of that order of magnitude occur right here. But the first thing I'm checking is just, we're on a remote machine, they're all connected. Can they actually type, right? And I don't mean, can you type physically, can you hit your key? I mean, when you hit the key is what you're expecting showing up on the computer. So, you know, here I need to get everybody's name into here. It would be very easy to have a single typist type in all the names. That's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to have each and every person type in their own name. So, that's interesting.
And when we rotate again, yeah.
Okay, well, sound came back at least.
Oh, we didn't get press. Hold on.
All right, we will cut the sound there. So anyhow, I have each and every person just type in their name. That went pretty simple, right? We started at 5, we ended at 6:30, less than a minute to get everyone's name in. But now I know at least everybody can talk, or everyone can type into the machine. And so it's just a really quick thing of if there was a problem, maybe someone's keyboard didn't map the way we expected or something like that, we would know right away. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have them practice rotating. All right, and this, bring up notes, actually starts at 7:30. I want you to,
There's going to be 3 rows.
I want you to watch the first 3 times they do, or the first 2 times they do this, and the last 3 times they do this, right? So I'm going to have every single person call out who's talking, or sorry, who's typing, who's talking, and who's next, right? And then they're going to rotate, and the talker is going to become the typist, and they're, again, just going to call out talking, typing, next. So here it is starting, and we're starting with Harold.
So we're going to have the person.
By the way, everyone can hear the sound when I do that? Thumbs up. Okay, good.
Who's typing?
I'm not sure you're sharing the sound from your computer
One person is talking. Or
because
typing.
it's a different option to share screen.
One person who's next. We're going to call out all three of those roles. So when Harold starts, Harold will be the first person. He'll be typing. Kevin will be next. He'll be the person who's talking. Sorry, Kevin will be talking. And then Gregor will be next. Right? So I just want you to practice saying that. So first, Harold, start as if you're starting your timer. So I just want you to say, Harold, I'm talking. Or I'm typing. You're on mute. We're gonna
Harold doesn't say anything because he's just typing and I'm talking.
but I want everyone to call out what their role is on rotations. I want to practice that really quickly.
Okay. Harold, I'm typing.
Kevin, I'm talking.
Gregor, I'm next.
Good. Okay,
But
so
what
then
does next mean? The next one typing or the next one talking? Or
it'll be the next one talking. So when we rotate, the talker will become the typist. That's Kevin, continue as if we just rotated.
So I'm typing.
So who will be talking? So right after Kevin is Gregor. So Gregor, you're going to be talking. So say that you're talking.
I'm talking.
And then who will be next?
All right, so that's a minute and a half, and we've gotten through 2 rotations of talking typing. I'm going to take them through all of the things, and so I'm going to move us forward to last 2 rounds, 7-11. So right about here. All right, and so now we're going to do the last 2 rounds.
Fred, I'm next.
Rotate again.
Well, Fred, I'm typing. Fred, I'm talking.
Harold, I'm next.
Cool, and I think that's our full rotation.
So that was 15 seconds, right? Within this entire process took 3.5 minutes, right? But the last third of it took 15 seconds. And that's exactly what I mean by 0 to 1, right? When you're getting started, everything is going to be much, much slower. And when you get to do it again and again and again, it's going to start going much, much faster. And that's just how learning works. I feel like that's just an intrinsic part of being a person who learns, right? So just be very aware of 0 to 1 situations because they show up all the time. All right. Next, we're basically ready to start. But we don't start until about here, which is 28 minutes into it. Now, why does it take 30 minutes to get set up the first time? It's 0 to 1 again, right? And I don't know why, because I've set up like a ton of times. It always seems like the first time you're going to spend this half hour, even when everything is basically going right. And I don't know why that is, but I see it over and over and over again. And many, many times I've done this, and including the thousands of times I've done this in person. Like there's always, anytime it involves some sort of setup and coordination with people, just expect that your first half hour to hour is going to be set up. I was in a class a couple weeks ago, and they did mobbing, and they had set up, and they're like, we have, make sure your machines are set up. We'll get together. And he allowed it 5 minutes for the group to get set up. And I was like, my experience is that's not going to work, right? And my experience bore out. It took us another hour and a half before both teams working independently were able to work, right? I don't know why it is, but just be aware of it. Because if you don't take it into account, what ends up happening is you really budget time wrong. And then there's this extra feeling of stress in the group where they're like, we haven't even started and we're already behind, right? And so just be aware that there is this cost of startup, and just budget for it is my suggestion. Having extra time is never a problem. You will see that I am really bad at budgeting time in general, and I am trying to tell you to make time for this. All right, so let's get to the next thing I want to talk about. So, so first of all, that practice, did that practice work? Right, and the answer is yes, it does. And I'll show you some examples here. So, sorry, just going through my notes. 47, 8, 48, 17. So right here, okay, so you can see that this mob timer has the person who is currently talking, or sorry, let's try that again. Has the person who is currently typing, right? And so,
I'm Marco, I'm typing.
so it's Marco's turn, and it's his turn to type. Now, what Marco should do right now is hit anywhere in this red square, but that's not actually what he does. He hits this fast forward bar, right? Completely by accident.
I'm talking. I'm next.
And it advances it to Daniel's turn, but nobody notices.
Okay, yeah, please start the turn, and then let's go back to the code.
This persists for a couple of rounds. So let's go to here. Maybe. There you go.
I'm typing. My time is over. Okay. So Dimitri,
So it is Dimitri's turn to type. It very obviously says Fred. It doesn't matter. Like right now, the timer is not the thing that is saying who's in place. They already have figured out where they are in line, right? They've internalized that to such an extent that the timer being wrong doesn't matter to them, right? Which means they are maintaining that visual idea of when they are up next, when they really need to be paying attention, and when it's okay for them to take a little bit of a break, right? Which is an important thing because we all need times to take a break. And in fact, if you watch the cameras in here, you'll see me in particular leave from time to time where I need to either get water or go to the bathroom. You will see other people leave as well or walk around the house. Like there are times where you need it, but you don't want that time to be the 3 minutes where you are at the keyboard or the 3 minutes where you are typing. And this helps people understand like where the line is. And knowing that gives them the ability to budget and play with their time and their energy much better. Right? And that all occurred because of that 4 minutes we spent at the very beginning doing that stupid exercise of just calling out who's talking, who's typing, and who's next. Right? Something we used to get for free because we could literally see where we were in line. All right, next, I want to talk about your job as a facilitator. And I see my job as sort of 3 main things that I'm trying to do, right? I'm here to, in the beginning, to enforce the rules, right? Like I am trying to set up a structure in which they can play. So I need to enforce rules. I'm going to use one of the most powerful tools in my tool belt there, which is affirmations to do that, right? I really wanted to put together an affirmation roll here of just little things of me saying stuff, but let's just show a couple of them here. So here,
new verify method, I think. So
you hear that little, Like if I did a cut of every time I did that little sound or like a yay or like, I think I have like a good 20-minute solid of every time I see something I like, it is my job as a facilitator to give just a little bit of encouragement so that I will see it again. At 110, I do this in a more pronounced way.
Right. Because of the right reason. The reporter should have been called on, and it wasn't called because, yeah, it's not working yet. So would you rather get it running first before we
Of
do
course,
it?
yeah. If you do the refactoring, it should be running first.
So happy with you guys right now.
Like every time you see behavior you want to see again, it is your job to give encouragement that you were happy you saw that. That is a really powerful, and it's much more powerful than the other tool I'm going to use, which to keep the rules enforced, which I would refer to as pain, right? Or enforcement, right? The idea is like you want to use pain and enforcement as little as possible, right? That's not to say that there isn't a place for it. And I'm going to show you me enforcing rules as well, right? And in the beginning, you're going to see a lot more of that because they don't yet have an idea of what the rules I want them to follow are. So we're going to need to like have a bit stronger facilitation in the beginning. But my goal as a facilitator is to relax that as quickly as possible. I'm going to show you some way of that. And then so the other thing I'm doing as a facilitator is I'm nudging, right? So we're going to do affirmations, nudges, and rule enforcement. Those are the three big things that you're doing as a facilitator. And then the very last thing is sort of a little bit different, but it's going to be, you're going to facilitate the retro, right? We'll talk about the retro as we get to the end. The only sort of preview I'll give you here is I massively misbudgeted the time for the retro. My thought was we're going to spend 2.5 hours programming, a half hour retroing that would be enough. I was off by a factor of 3. But we'll get to that later. Anyhow, so let's take a look at some rule enforcement first. And specifically, I want to look at it in regards, oh, actually, wait, sorry. Let me actually stop for a second. Before I get to facilitation, let's switch a little bit my hat to coach. And again, this gets a little bit blurry, right? What I am doing here might be coach, it might be product owner, and it might be a little bit of facilitator. I'm not entirely sure at this point, but what I have found is there were these pauses and things that would occur to get understanding when we were in person. And if I go back to some of those pictures of us in person, you'll notice here over on the side, there's a whiteboard, right? And we would use that whiteboard. We don't have one set up here. Here we are using sticky notes, and there's actually a whiteboard off to the side. Here we have a whiteboard right here, and then you'll see sticky notes like popping all the way up here. Here we had a whiteboard, but that one's over to the side as well. Here you can see on the sides, whiteboards here, stickies all over the place, whiteboards here, whiteboards here. Like there's these things that occur in the physical world where you're just doing communication. And the reason for that is to get everyone on the same page. In remote, that is just as important, but a little bit harder to do. And so another mechanism that I use a lot is pausing the timer, where we say, like, we're just going to pause the timer and we are going to get everybody on the same page. And most of the time, because like there are whiteboarding techniques that work in virtual world, but what I find actually works usually the best is just English. Like just take a little break from the code and spend a little bit of time on the English. And so you're going to see me do this before we start doing anything. English 34. All right, so here we are. And you can see up here on line 13, we are starting to write, these are the things that as a product owner, I want them to do in this session, right?
The second thing is I want the ability to call it with and options as the last parameter. And then I want it to be able to pass it with an options using the builder pattern that says which reporter it wants. So like an options with reporter. But I also want it to work with an options that just takes a reporter in the constructor. So pass with an options.
So you can see right there, like, we're definitely not in agreement right now.
So one at a time. So pass with an options constructed with a reporter. Constructed in the, I want it in the constructor, so new options of the reporter. Options constructed with a reporter.
And then I want to step forward just a little bit. So these 4 things, these are the things that I want in general. And that just gives sort of a overarching thing. I want to be really clear. It's not like we all understand this and I can just walk away right now, right? But what this does do is give a little bit of anchoring of what's coming up, and they can refer back to it when we're in something to get an idea of where they are. It's like it's sort of like a map, right? So it's not the same as like going to train, but when you need to, you can check back and say, oh, I see sort of where we are right now. It just helps to get context. And then I'm going to take the very first thing we're going to work on, which of course is the third thing that I said. And we're going to do the same thing, delving into that story a bit, right? So
there's a couple different tests. It's going to report.
So I take a couple more moments to state out, okay, for the first test, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do. Right. And I also spent a little bit of time before this just going through what approvals was like at all, right? Which approvals is a testing API, so going through it is writing code. But very often if I'm doing this with a product, it means literally opening up the product and pushing the buttons and like, you want to see how a user checks their reports? Let's open up and hit the buttons and hit the buttons. And oh, it'd be really nice if there was a button here that did this, right? Like use the product, get people so they have an idea of what it is that they're trying to do. And these breaks, you're going to see us use them like 3 or 4 times in different manners. So I'm going to take, this is just getting us started. Every time we load a new story, we're going to do a sort of break like this. Now, those breaks are going to get smaller as people understand the stories better. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to break like this when we don't have understanding. I don't think that showed up in this particular instance. Everybody understood most of the technology parts that we're working in. But for example, a week ago in the class, we had some people who were not familiar with Lambda syntax. And so when we introduced it, after we were done using it, we actually stopped and we took, you know, like 2 or 3 minutes just to sort of explain the different pieces of Lambda syntax and what's going on. And so anytime that like something new gets introduced, not before you use it first, right? Just extend that trust. But after you use it, pause and just take a little moment to sort of make sure people understood what just happened. And we don't want to do that running on somebody's time. So making the pause to the timer is really a useful technique as a facilitator to say, I don't think everyone's on the same page. We need to take a break and just focus on getting people working together. And I guess I haven't said this, but in that 0 to 1, which, you know, we are definitely in as a mob. This is our first time mobbing together. The main thing that I am trying to do is get the team to work together, right? Sorry, so I have everybody's faces over there. So every time I'm looking at you, I'm not looking at the camera, and it must be awkward. So anyhow, when I'm doing my first mob, that is my goal. It's not to produce code, right? Like, we're going to produce code. That's the exercise that we're doing. But that first mob, the goal to produce code is the same as like the goal is to reach the top of the chin-up bar, right? Like, that's not the goal. Like, the goal is to get stronger. Right? And so in that regards, I'm going to spend a lot of time taking breaks. I'm also going to pick an easy problem. And this is part of human nature, but it's sort of a subtle part of human nature. Like, I'm guessing a lot of people here have games and hobbies that they enjoy. And I'm guessing that the games and hobbies you enjoy, you're fairly good at. And that is not a coincidence. Right? You don't tend to enjoy things that you aren't good at. Right? And so if you choose something very hard, and this is not only common, I would say it's the default. Most teams, when you go to them and you say, we're going to try mob programming, what should we try? They will pick a problem that they have been struggling with as a team. And they're saying like, hey, you know, we've always had this one class we can't clean up, or we've always wanted to implement this and we've never been able to. Let's try mobbing on that. That's a horrible thing to mob on the first time, right? Your team hasn't been able to do it for a year, and now you're going to try to do it in 2 hours. And if it doesn't work, are you going to say that mobbing was the problem, or just you chose something that was really hard, right? So you're biasing yourself for failure. But on top of that, it's a really bad learning technique, because let's say you're trying to learn to ride a bike for the first time. The last thing you want to do is start downhill biking on a treacherous terrain. Like, that's not where you learn to ride a bike. You learn to ride a bike in a really safe parking lot with nothing around whatsoever. And it's, you know, like where you can just focus on the bike and not on not dying, right? Because when you're learning something, all of your energy goes into the thing that you're learning, right? And in mobbing, what you actually want is very little of your energy going into the mob, and your actual energy going into the code. But in the beginning, it can't be that way. In the beginning, it has to be your energies going into how do you listen to people? How do you talk to people, right? How do you rotate? How do you keep everyone on the same page? How do you say something in 3 minutes to an extent that 3 minutes later, a completely different person can continue your thought because you didn't finish your thought, because there's no way to finish a thought in 3 minutes, right? Like, you need to give information that people can follow in a moment. And these are all skills that you need to get fluent enough with, meaning you can do without thought, so that you can focus on the actual thing you're trying to code. And that's why in the beginning, we choose simple problems. When I first got to mob with Harold, I was doing C++, which for a lot of people, just being in C++ world is scary enough. And so our first problem was just changing all of the include guards at the top to pragma once. And that was enough to get us through an hour and a half of work. But it's a very simple task. It also made us go to some Python, which was another part of the process for the building of C++ into a single header file. So we did some C++, we did some Python, we did C-line, we did PyCharm. Like, that's a whole bunch of new things. You didn't need to add really complicated C++ on top of it, or a really hard programming problem, right? Just be aware that, like, when people are learning proficiently, all of their energy, all of their conscious energy is going into that activity, and they do not have extra conscious energy to put somewhere else. When you see people doing 2 things at once, that second thing is always something they can do fluently without thought. Right? And that's never going to be the case for something you're learning new. So we pause here. We pause later. So I mentioned that, like, as a facilitator, I'm trying to get the group to work together. Part of working together is I want to encourage ideas and options. So every time I can, I'm going to try to get them to come up with more ideas. And I'm going to show you a couple places where we do this. And this is something, by the way, this is something that I love about mobbing over pairing, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of pair programming as well. But one thing that I notice is that when I pair program with someone, like if I work by myself, I tend to have an idea and that's the idea I do, right? And I think that's sort of how people work, right? Usually you have your go-to idea, like I know how to solve this problem, I've done it before, and this is the way I'm going to do it. Or you might have your like reach idea of like, well, I've heard about this other idea, let's try it out. And like an easy example of that is, let's say you're going to go for lunch and you're just by yourself. You probably have the restaurant that you normally go to lunch to, and that's where you're going to be going to lunch, right? But if you're meeting with someone else, you might be like, oh, there's this restaurant I always wanted to try. Let's try it out. So now you're trying like a new restaurant. What I found is in a mob, very often, the moment you get to a new idea, you're going to get many other ideas. And I want to show you that happen right here. And then I'm going to roll back to show you how I encourage that while maintaining flow, right? So let's start with that. Sorry, let me find the notes. Vote 134. All right. Okay. So at this point, just to set the stage, we want to rename a class. There's another thing we want to do too. You'll see me shut that down for a moment. We'll come back to it. But we want to rename a class.
Use too many words because the less words for the defined report is just a
Mock reporter.
So Dimitri is sort of pointing out that the name that we have for the class, it's just not a very good name. And he wants to rename it to Mock Reporter. Completely reasonable thing to do. However, watch this.
We have, I think this is verifying reporter.
yeah,
So we
find
have
between F and
spy reporter.
Approval failure report is spy.
We have
that's the one I'm going.
failure reporter spy. Do we have any other options?
What about the original option of not extracting it?
We're just working on the name at the moment.
So that's me focusing us on the one thing. You'll see me deal with the other thing in a moment. I'll talk about the importance of both of those. So the thing I want to point out here is we had one name and then someone didn't like the name and we didn't end up with two names. We ended up with 4 names, right? And I see this happen in the mob a lot, that the moment you sort of, as a facilitator, open the idea that it's okay to brainstorm, you will get a lot of ideas. So the next thing is once you collect all those ideas, you need to decide. And this goes to the other thing you're trying to do as a facilitator, which is encourage action, right? Because if you just keep talking about this, it will go forever, right? But voting on this is pretty quick. So it's quick for me to gather all these ideas, and it's quick for the group to decide which idea they like. And so I'm going to do this using a mechanism that I use a lot of voting with a thumb vote. And so the idea of the thumb vote is your thumb is up if you like it, it's down if you don't like it, it's sideways if you don't care. But everybody votes, and everybody votes on everything. So we're going to be looking at this little window down in the corner as I do this vote, right? And this is the first time we do the vote, so it's going to take a little bit.
One thing at a time. Any other options for the name?
I mean, the point is if we don't extract it, we don't need a name.
Yes, but we can always delete a name easily. Like let's first get to what our 2 choices are. So any other options on the name?
I'm just making it a little easier to vote here by assigning numbers to things.
Defined reports are anything Y between F and I.
Everybody's thumbs should be up right now, or everyone's thumb should be present.
Okay, so there are a couple of things I want to point out here. First of all, basically nobody ends up liking Mock Reporter. Interestingly, that includes the person who originally suggested it as a name, right? And this is another thing that I find is very often, like in the brainstorming thing, it's your own ideas aren't the ones you get attached to. And that's actually amazing, right? Because very often in a meeting, people, their identity and ego gets wrapped to their idea so strongly, right? One of the really nice things about this mechanism of mobbing is you just tend to care much more about the work rather than the credit. And that's something that's really hard to do in a meeting, but it seems to surface quite a lot in mobbing.
All right, who likes verifying reporter?
So we see a couple thumbs
Who
here.
likes spy reporter?
Don't really see any
Who
thumbs
likes
here.
approval failure reporter spy?
Look at all those thumbs up. Like this is something that I see happen a lot, which is the group just has they have not a unanimous consensus, but an overwhelming consensus on the things that they like. Right?
Overwhelmingly, that is the name. So first, let's refactor it to that.
So we refactor this, and there was two things that we were playing with it here. So you're about to see a second vote occur. This is the vote that I put off just a few moments ago, right? Remember the person was like, if we inline it, we don't even need a name. And I was like, nope, we're not doing that yet. It's super important as a facilitator to get the group to focus. It is just as important as a facilitator that when you shut something down, you pause it, you don't forget it, right? Like you don't want the group to think that they're not being heard, right? You're gonna see me do that again in a much longer time scale, even to get to the point that we are at right now. But I just wanna point that out, like I'm trying to get the group to move, but I don't want people to feel like they're not being heard, right? So there's a big difference to not now versus not ever.
I guess I'm still.
All right, so we do the refactoring here.
Inside of here. Anonymous.
And now we're gonna vote on whether or not that class should actually even exist. So we have it as an anonymous class.
Number two.
And we have it as, sorry, we have an anonymous class and we have it as an external class. And of course, as we do that, we get a third option, because again, options tend to grow if you encourage them.
That's fine. Good. Is there any other options?
And external probably would be the alternative to inner.
Okay, so I've gathered the possibilities in the group, and now I need to vote. So I'm gonna use the same mechanism that I use normally of the thumb votes. But look at what happens here. It's a little bit weird.
All right. Who likes anonymous?
The external should be up to inner.
It doesn't matter. It's fine. So number one, who is in favor of the anonymous class?
All right, so I'm gonna just count here. It looks like there's 4 thumbs up for anonymous, which is pretty good, right?
All right. Who is in favor of the external class?
Basically, no one seems to like the external class.
All right. And then who is in favor of the inner class?
And it looks like we got 3, possibly 4 thumbs. It's a little hard to tell if I think Fred's is sideways. Anyhow, that's a very close vote. And when I do the thumb vote, if I don't have an overwhelming, something that's just like, obviously this is what the group wants, I'm then gonna do a second vote where I force them to choose either or. So I'm gonna re-vote this. I'm gonna eliminate the options that weren't important. Usually I keep just the top 2 options. Sometimes if it's a really close vote, I will keep the top 3 options. In this case, it wasn't, so we just kept anonymous and inner class. And now I'm only gonna let them vote once.
All right. So, that is a...
Gregor also put his thumb in
I
there.
think we had more people for inner. Let's only do show of hands. You only get to vote once, because that was kind of close. We're just going to do it between inner and anonymous. So who wants anonymous? And who wants inner? Marco, you are the tying vote breaker, and you
I
have
don't
not
have a
voted.
strong opinion about that. I'm not too familiar enough with Java to actually have a strong opinion about that.
All right, in that case, I will break the tie and make it an inner class.
Okay, so I want to talk about breaking the tie as a facilitator. I'm doing this actually again in a double hat, right? I'm also doing this as a coach. I know what the right answer to this question is. Technically speaking, the right answer hasn't been on the table yet because the right answer was an external class, but they voted that one out right in the beginning. So that's not the one we're going to do, but the second best answer is going to be an internal class. The thing that I want to point out is even though I'm bringing my coaching hat here, it actually doesn't matter. Let's say I didn't know what the right answer is. It's still the right thing to do as a facilitator to break the tie because movement is more important. And only one of two things can happen. Either I choose the right answer or I choose the wrong answer, right? If you choose the right answer, great, well done. If you choose the wrong answer, there's two other things that can happen. One is it doesn't actually matter. The answer is much more stylistic than mechanical, right? So like maybe you like your curly braces to line up, or maybe you like them to be not lined up like an animal, but it doesn't really matter, right? Like in the end, choose something that's consistent for the team and you're going to be okay, right? And the consistency matters much more than the actual answer. It's just a stylistic difference. And in which case, it doesn't matter that you chose the wrong one. Or it does actually matter, right? In which case, this is not the last time you will be talking about it. Meaning you don't need the right answer now. You will still get to the right answer eventually. In this particular case, the moment we wrote the second test, even if I had them choose the wrong answer, they would have revisited it and said, okay, this is now annoying. We'd like to be able to reuse this code, right? So it doesn't really matter that you choose the wrong answer. And this is something that's important for the mob to learn. But I find that like the facilitator needs to learn and internalize this first before the mob can, right? It's okay to do the wrong thing. It's okay to take the scenic route. It's okay to take the long path to get to success. You don't need to do things as efficiently as possible. You can trust in your group that eventually they will get the right thing, even if they go through wrong paths. The only thing you need to do is keep moving. All right. The problem with choosing the wrong answer is that you get stuck there, right? As long as you keep moving, as long as you keep revisiting, as long as you keep encouraging people to give their ideas and cast votes when there's disagreements, like you will get to the right answer, even if you go through a bad period, right? It's getting stuck, which is the real problem. So if you can encourage that as a facilitator, the people in your mob will start exhibiting that behavior as well, because they will start to have experience that we did the wrong thing, but look, we got to where I wanted anyways, right? Once you have that experience, you can then build that faith, and then you can build that like philosophy. I want to show how we got here. So I want to point out we're on minute 140 right now, right? And this is where we're voting on which way to do it. But I'm going to roll all the way back to, sorry, just scanning through my notes here, or notes here. Try second ideas here. Shoot, I think this is at 45. I might have this, my timing's wrong here. Here, here. Right about here. Okay.
Okay, then let's edit.
So you need to make it a test class member because otherwise will not compile at this position.
Okay, then let's edit. Then move this Boolean declaration one line below into the.
Actually, that's not the issue. The issue is mutability in Java lambdas. If you put it back in, so what I'm about to do is so.
Oh, okay. So we'll come back to what this is happening right here. This is, yeah, we'll come back to this in a second. I want to get to the first thing first. So we're here.
This is a little bit ugly. I would like to change the design of this dummy approval failure reporter if you.
Okay, so here we are at minute, so 1 hour, 6 minutes in, and Gregor is like, this idea is ugly. Let's change the design, right? Now, first of all, I want to point out, Gregor was absolutely right. That was the right thing to do, right? However, we had not yet finished the thing that they are trying to do, right? And so again, this goes to your job as a facilitator is always to grow options. You want to make sure that everyone feels like they have a voice and what can be done. And no matter how stupid their idea is, us as a group, we're willing to try it, right? That doesn't mean we're willing to accept it in the end, but we're willing to try it. You've got an idea. You don't have to justify it. You don't have to defend it. We're going to try it. So when Gregor does this, you're going to notice I'm going to shut him down, right? This is me enforcing that rule, right? And I'm doing it right now through pain, right? Like I'm just literally saying, don't do that. So here that happens.
Okay with it. And I would put the Boolean as a field inside the new approval reporter, because if we do it like this, we can sort of build like our own stuff that we can use in several tests.
So let me suggest you get it working first. But yeah, okay, and then get it to there.
Now, because I'm the facilitator, I have the privilege to sort of just do that, right? Like I can just sort of make him not do it. But like I said, like that's the right thing to do. I want them to try their things. But if I don't come back to this idea, like I'm literally failing as a facilitator. So it's going to be, sorry, let me check my notes. Try second idea, 22. So here we are at 017. It's another 13 minutes, another 15 minutes. Whoosh. No, that's gonna take a while. 22:40.
Congratulations, you've done it.
Okay, so let's go. Now that we have it, a long time ago, I forget who it was, suggested a refactoring, and I sort of asked them to hold off until he got to this point. But let's try whoever's idea that was now.
Yes, I had the idea that we could.
So it's okay to stop ideas so that you can finish your current idea. That's a useful mechanism as a facilitator. You just really need to make sure that you do try that idea once you finish the current idea, right? And that way you actually get to sample and try both ideas, the one that you're working on and the other person's idea. So notice like the first one is basically being done by pain. Like I'm just telling him, shut up, right? The second one is being done by encouragement, right? And again, you want to be facilitating much more with pleasure than with pain, right? You'll need to use both of these tools, but really, really try to minimize the amount that you use pain. Try to maximize the amount you use pleasure. So this is where we try the other one. So we try this at 22. The voting that we just saw is occurring at 34. So we're going to spend 12 minutes doing this idea. We just spent 15 minutes doing the other idea. One of those wins out, meaning either 12 or 15 minutes is going to get wasted. The way I see most teams try to avoid that waste of 12 to 15 minutes is to talk about which one we should do for half an hour. It's a bad return on investment for two reasons. A, it literally takes longer, and it encourages the person who loses not to try again, right? We want to encourage people to give us their ideas, right? And that is much easier said than done, right? Because when you say your idea and people like react badly to it, that is a really strong motivator to not say your idea again. So when you say your idea and we say, yeah, let's do that, and then we all look back and say, oh, that wasn't a very good idea. Like, that's a very different thing than saying, oh no, that's a stupid idea, we're not going to try it. Right? And just as we saw before, people who recommend the idea might not be the person who's voting for the idea, right? And in fact, what Gregor is about to do is to pull this out into an external class, which again, as a technical coach, is the right thing to do. He doesn't even vote for that idea in the end. He votes for it as an internal class, right? So just be aware that, like, by trying all the ideas and then voting, we're allowing people to detach ego from the idea. And that allows them to take the idea based on the merits they see at the time. And they've actually got to sample it, so it's much more likely. And this goes to like a core human property, that people have very strong beliefs about things they have not experienced. And they do not modify the intensity of that belief simply because they have not experienced it. You might be like, I've never tried haggis, but I know that's going to be horrible, right? Like, it doesn't matter that you haven't tried the food, you still have an opinion on it, or you haven't seen the movie, but you know it's going to suck, right? And an interesting aspect of confirmation bias is you will see a lot of trailers for movies, and then you will go and you will not see any of the ones you don't like. So you never learn that those movies might have been great. Now, you will go and see the ones that you did like, and you'll learn that some of those also sucked. So you'll get some hesitation and be like, it looks good, let's see if it actually is good. But you never get the, well, it looked bad, maybe it was actually a gem, right? You never get that the negative violation. So by trying all the ideas, we get to learn that some of those ideas that look really bad are actually amazing, right? But the only way you get that is by trying them all. And we also encourage people to speak. And this is a really important part of getting the quiet people to speak. I'm going to talk about this more as well in terms of the way I'm actually doing the mechanics of rotation. But you want all the voices to speak. Now, some voices in your group are just naturally going to want to speak more, right? Usually they're extroverts, though sometimes you have loud people who are not extroverts. But you always have different levels that people will naturally participate. And that's okay. But you need to encourage everyone to participate when they need to. So again, the way I think about this is like a band and the person who plays the cymbals. The cymbals in an orchestra, a lot of orchestras have cymbals, right? Because very often a couple big loud clangs make a sound or a song much, much better. But the cymbalist does not play very much during the song, right? They're not constantly clanging those things together. They are doing it like once or twice a song to add emphasis, and that makes the song better. And you might have people on your team that are sort of like this as well. They don't speak that often, but the things they do say really bring a lot to the team, really bring a lot to the product. The value of your speaking isn't the frequency, right? So you don't need people to be talking all the time. What you do need is that everyone brings the piece that is like essential to make a better product. Everyone brings the thing that they uniquely have. And an advanced part of participating in the mob, which is a different thing than facilitating a mob, is only bringing the piece that you absolutely need. So if you are a very advanced developer, what you're going to want to do is only speak when you have to. Even though you know all the answers, your job is only to give the answers that the rest of the team can't get on their own. I want to show a really short presentation about this concept. Oh, okay. That's not what I was expecting. What just happened? All right, you can still see my screen? Yes, thumbs up. All right, I'm just going to close PowerPoint and open it again. Have you tried turning it off and on? All right, we'll do it this way. Video games. I love video games in general. During the pandemic, I've been playing even more of them. This is my team. Let me introduce you. This is Balto. He's strong and he's tough and he's awesome. This is Naomi. Not quite as strong or tough, but very awesome. And she is a range unit. She can shoot from a distance, which is super useful. And this is Faye. Faye sucks. She's weak. She dies easily. She misses a lot. And when she hits, she doesn't do much damage. Anyhow, we're out adventuring and we come across these spiders. And so we need to kill the van spiders. Now, Balto can kill these with a single blow. Right? Just whack, van spider's dead. But I'm not going to do that. And the reason I'm not going to do it is because later on in the game, I got to kill this guy. And there's no way Balto can kill this guy by himself. So what am I going to do? I'm going to take Balto and I'm going to take away his axe and I'm going to give him a club, a much weaker weapon. I'm going to nerf him. I'm going to make him less effective. And then I'm going to focus on Faye. I'm going to let her kill the spiders. Now, she's going to miss a lot, but eventually she'll get the spiders and she'll get experience for killing those spiders and she'll start becoming a more powerful player. And you might ask, if my whole point here is to make Faye more powerful, why am I even bringing Balto? Like, does he need to be here so that Faye can get more powerful? And the answer is yes. Yes, he does. Because Faye will die. If I try to do this battle without Balto, Faye will die. And I need to win this battle. But I also need to win the game. Right? If I just win the battle by killing with Balto, I will not be able to win the game. I need to win the battle and I need to win the game. So, by the way, I'm not doing this because I like Faye. Faye is not a real person. I'm trying to win the game. This is the best strategy for me to win the game. That's why I'm doing this. There's no fuzziness or thing like that. These aren't real people. I'm not caring about their emotions. I'm just trying to win the game. This is the best way to win the game. So what does this look like when I'm doing the software game? Well, I have my team again, and I have my expert. She can slay this problem with no problem. Like, she knows how to do this. And of course, I've got my noob. He kind of doesn't know what he's doing right now. So I'm going to use the same strategy that I used to win the video game. I'm going to nerf my expert. I'm going to make them be quiet. And this can be really hard and painful for someone with that expertise, where they know the right answer and they just really need to say it, right? And then we're going to let the newbie try to do his solution. And, you know, he's going to miss, just like Faye. And that means you might need to extra nerf your expert, right? Because again, it can be really hard to stay quiet when someone's doing the wrong thing. They're not even doing nothing. They're doing the wrong thing. So we're going to need a little extra patience there, a little extra quiet. But when the newbie is done, if the solution is not to the level that the expert wants, now, just like Balto's there to make sure that we win the battle, even though we're focusing on making space for the team to level up, now my expert needs to step in. Then they come in. And again, this is how you win the game of software development. You need to win today's battles, but you cannot forget about next year's wars. And a stronger team is going to win next year more than anything an individual can do this today. Too often we get too focused. Now, I want my team to do this, but I'm also doing this when I'm wearing the hat of facilitator and when I'm wearing the hat of coach. So I'm going to show you this at a very basic level of what I'm doing here. So we're going to do this in terms of rotation, right? So here, okay, so I'm going back to the video. That's not the video. That's not the video. No. Here, there we go. Okay, so let's get going right in the very beginning. Here we are things, here we have the test. All right, so.
Go to line 28 and
it says catch.
All right, so we have our first person up. And
like control R3.
Failure reporter.
no, I missed it. Sorry, 1 second.
So yeah, and go to line 28, a reporter as an argument. Like this exactly.
All right, Gregor's talking right
Maybe,
here.
options
Oh, right here. Okay.
I guess I'm typing now.
So right here. Yep. Okay, so first of all, you hear that bell? That bell is the indicator that it's time to rotate. Notice immediately I'm saying rotate. Because how would they know? This is the first time the bell ever goes off. Right? And so we're at 0 to 1. So as a facilitator, like I need to introduce this concept to the group. And so I am saying rotate, getting them to rotate. You'll hear right here.
I guess I'm typing now.
That's them acknowledging that I said it, right? Later on, so we're going to jump to 2140. So now we're about 40 minutes from that point.
So now you can call it again, and then my time is obviously over.
At this point, like the group is doing it on their own, right? Like he's predicting the time is coming up. Like my time is obviously over. I'm no longer needing to speak, right? In between me calling it out and the group, and anytime the group calls it out, it's a win as a facilitator. Like your job as a facilitator and as a coach, because in a weird way, This is coaching. It's just coaching facilitation techniques as opposed to coaching technical techniques. You might need to stop the group to introduce, or you might need to call something out to introduce a technique, because if they do not know it, there's no way for it to just spontaneously appear. You need to plant that seed. And the first couple times you might need to continue to plant the seed, but then you are looking for every opportunity that you are not the person doing it. All right. And so you'll notice in between here, and let me find the point, double bell 106. So here, so now the bell goes off. This would be the place for me to say rotate.
This is Kevin. I will be typing.
This is Gregor. I will be talking.
But I wait till the bell rings again for them to do it. Like I've already told them what the bell means. Now I'm creating space for them to start to pick up on it, right? I have a couple other places where I do this, but I'm missing where they are. 4817. I think this occurs as well. 48.
Yeah, it's that.
With an approval text. The string is called response, and
So that's a bell.
The 948 does the actual verify with an approval text writer. So
the bell is rotate.
Sorry?
The bell means rotate.
Oh,
Yeah, it's that.
So I let the bell go a couple times before I step in. I still have to step in eventually if they don't move, right? But I'm trying to let other things be the voice for me. Now, things is a good thing, right? So the bell is useful. And that's why we're turning on sound to the virtual machine at all. But other people also works, right? So you'll see, there's another place where I do this. No, I can't find the link. But the point here being, like, anytime you can as a facilitator, your job is to encourage Faye. So if you've introduced a technique, your job the next time is to not repeat the technique, but get other people to do it. And so this goes to, so we talked about affirmations and we talked about rule enforcement. We haven't spent too much talking about nudges, right? So a lot of times people, they kind of want to do the right thing, but they need just a little push, a little encouragement. And in a very simple technique to do that is to talk in questions instead of statements, right? So just talking in questions is going to be really, like, it's like one of the best techniques you have as a facilitator to nudge people. So let's 45, 25, 45. Right around here.
We want to do this.
okay. Where's the verify implemented? Could you go to the approvals class and look at the verify method there?
Go back to the let's finish this.
Shoot, I missed it. 45 there.
Can you take a look what you do with it? The signature of the verify is wrong. What does it take? It takes an approval.
So it doesn't exist yet, but we want it to exist.
So that's a horrible example of me speaking in questions, is that's not a question, but it is a nudge, right? Like, it is me saying, like, here's where you want to go. It doesn't exist, it needs to exist.
Okay. Where's the verify implemented? Could you go to the approvals class and look at the verify method there?
Another example of this is 5015.
It's not what we want to happen yet, because we actually have a different reporter from the options. But so the code itself is running, which is what I wanted to achieve in this step. So let's close this and take the next step to make sure that we actually use the reporter from the option.
That's me actually leaving the room. That's not the nudge that I'm looking for. Let's try 5345. Sorry. 53 40. There, try that.
Right now.
Read the error message.
All right. So it's also not a question, but it's also not like a direct statement. Right now, the problem is the error message has popped up. And the specific issue is, if you look here on line 38, they're catching an assertion error. But an assertion error is not being thrown, right? What's being thrown is a Java lang error. And it is tempting as a coach to just say that exactly. Like, that's not an assertion error, it's a Java lang error, right? But again, what you want to do is not tell the answer. You want to nudge them towards the answer. And the reason they're not seeing that is because they're not reading the error message. So rather than tell them that the exception is wrong, I want to just get them into the right direction. That's what I mean by nudge. I'm sort of pushing them towards the right direction, right?
Sorry?
Read the error message.
Yes, I'm doing approved failed approval error, but we wanted to try to catch the error. It's failed approval.
What is the error?
So this is me nudging again. What is the error? Because still hasn't actually read the error message.
It actually tells you what the error is. What's the error?
Yes, but actually for a moment I want to ignore it.
This is him saying, no, I don't want to read the error. But that's okay. Like, again, as a coach, very often when you're trying to introduce something new, right, people are going to, like, if they already were naturally doing it, then you're not coaching, right? Like, then you're just there. Right?
No, I know, but you're not ignoring it because you did read the error. What's the first line of red actually say?
A Java lang error. Does it mean that you are not using the assertion error, but you can try to catch any error? But so if the first thing I would actually fix in this framework, but I don't have enough time and passion. So it's assertion error just by error.
So just notice, like, all that's needed, like right now he knows what to do, right? There was just this little nudge that he needs, and then he can go and fix all the things that he needs to do with that information. And very often you're going to see people over there. So there's another place. Let me see if I can find it in my notes. 143.30. 143.30. Is it right about here? That's what I want.
Okay, great. But let's now run the test. It should work.
Okay, now I get it what you mean with inner class.
So, like, you can hear that moment of realization in the voice, right? Very often, if you give a nudge and then step back and make that space, then they will learn on their own, right? So you don't need to tell them the answer, but you do sometimes need them to move. And the nudge is a good way to do that. I want to show one more example of this when we're just trying to create a class. Oh, wait, 124. I want to show this too. This is another example of, instead of the bell, using another team member to do the explanation. So 124.
So-called anonymous class, therefore, like,
Okay, so that happened really quick. I want to do it again. I'll explain what just happened. I want to do it again. A question's answered, and you'll see me start to answer the question, right? Like this is part of me anyways. It's very like if I can answer a question and someone asks it, I want to answer that question. So you're gonna see me start. As soon as I start, Dimitri also starts. And then you'll see me shut up. Because no matter what Dimitri says at this moment, it is better than me doing it, right? Because he is part of the team and I am just facilitating.
You can also is a constructor that gets implemented here.
So-called anonymous class.
See that? That was really quick. But like he asked the question, I give like a beat. It's not a long enough pause. So I start answering the question, but immediately someone else does. And so I just stop. That's hard to do. For me personally, this is one of the, shutting up when I know an answer is really hard for me to do, right? But it's so important. Anytime you can introduce something and then the team is going to do it instead of you, and the way that happens is you have to give them space to do it, right? So introduce it the first time. Maybe you need to repeat it the second time, but then really look for every chance you get where someone who's not you is the one who's introducing it. All right, I want to show something else that it just so, this happens all the time, but it was so nicely stated. Out loud that I just wanted to show it. 129. Okay, so right here.
Directly. Yeah, I'm still using the array. So
I think it's right here.
So get it working, make it sense, right?
So get it working first is me nudging them, right? And specifically nudging towards action. Right?
Get it working first. Getting it working first, I think so the array is gone. Now please go to the options test and make sure that you actually use the has been called method in the assertion instead of the array on line 27.
Which line? 37.
Yeah, I'm still using the array, and I wanted to use the has been called function of the reporter instead. This will not work directly because you have to use the yeah.
Okay, so this is actually a separate thing I want to show, but right here, they're about to do something that cannot work. And the beautiful thing is that we do it anyways. And then the compiler tells us that it cannot work. And this entire process takes less than a minute, right?
You have to, so you're still using on that 31, the type of reporter is still the interface.
Oh, sorry, this is a different place that I was thinking.
So you need to use test approval failure reporter with options for the type of reporter.
Okay, sorry, I'm a little bit lost now.
Just from go to location.
Okay, hold on. So I still want to show the other thing, but let me talk about what just happened because this is also great. One of the tools that we use to talk to each other is a technique of intention, location, details, and talking in that mechanism. That can be really hard to talk in intention. I have another thing I'll show you in a moment. We're just getting someone to say the intention that they already know, they just don't know how to vocalize at the moment. Is going to take like a little practice. But right now he said the intention and Harold is saying, I don't understand what that means. Right? So I'm doing the nudge of move to location and you'll see him get him to the right place on the cursor. So right now his cursor is over here, right? But it needs to be over here. So
I think it was fine. Just make sure that and the start of 31, the type of reporter is.
So first of all, notice the there you go. That's my affirmation. He did what I wanted. He gets him right here. And now he's about to give an explanation. He's jumping to details of why, like what you need to do here. But notice what happens. Like immediately Harold like is shaking his head. It's like as soon as he got him to the right place, everything he said before made sense. It just didn't make sense when he was looking at the wrong place. And so very often, if you give intention and it doesn't happen, if you get him to the right location, you're done. Like that's enough. If it didn't, if he still didn't know what to do, we would then have to drop the keystrokes or details, right? But like Harold knows what to do. He just got a little bit lost. And so just getting him to the right part of the line, everything clicks, right? But okay, so this is great, but not actually what I wanted to show. What I wanted to show happened right before this.
Please do the rotation. Now we have an interesting situation because I disagree with this choice.
But we're gonna use it anyways.
So I love that he just outright says, I disagree with this choice, right? Very often in the mob, we are doing things we disagree with. Like that's part of us working as a team, is saying like, I trust my team enough that I'm going to support doing something in something I disagree with, knowing that after we're done, we can talk and decide if it was a good idea. But I'm willing to make a mistake with you. That is if you think about that, that is a really profoundly trusting statement. How many friends would you go on a bad idea with just because you're like, this is a stupid idea, but I love you, man, and we're going to do it together anyways, right? Like that's a really good friend. And here you are doing it with teammates that you might not even like before. Like, you know, like how many people like their coworkers? Like that's a really profound statement. And when you do that, that's a big reason that like teams actually form, right? Yeah, so I love that he actually said out loud how he was feeling and he was still willing to just do it, right? You're not saying I agree with it. You're actually saying I disagree with it, but I'm going to do it anyways. That is a really powerful thing. I wanted to find that intention thing. First failing test, explanation, disagree, location clears up intent. That's, I think, what we just saw. Damn. We're going to really early on. Oh, here he is. I think it's here on line 47. So let's go to here. So in this situation, assuming I got the right one, our navigator, our talker, is a little confused on what he wants to do. It's interesting because he actually does know what he wants to do. So
How to do it? Why do you want to copy it? What do you
there we go.
Okay.
Why did you want to copy it?
Go to the test back again because I'm still struggling understanding what I actually want to do.
That's okay.
So, okay.
Why did you want to copy it?
So what happened just before this is he wanted to make a new method. So he jumped from intent to location to details right away. And he was like, copy and paste this thing. All right. And what I'm trying to do right now is get him to go to intent. And you're going to see a little bit of a struggle there because even though like he was doing the copy and paste. So you know there's a part of him that was like, I need to create a new method. It's going to take us a little bit of time to actually articulate that that's what's going on.
Just put that part to English, to words.
Okay, I get it. So just give me a second. I need to understand, okay, hello is a string. So the method we need to copy is the method which takes the string of the first part.
Right, but that's how to do it. Why do you want to copy it? What are you trying to achieve?
I try to build a method which do the same thing than the string method before, just taking a second parameter, which is the option.
So would it be fair to say you want to create a new method?
Yes, sure.
Right. So that takes like a minute. And the reason it takes a minute isn't because he knew what he wanted to do. He's just not used to speaking at a high level like that to get something to occur in a computer. Because then normally if you talk to a computer, like nothing happens at all. And maybe you have voice recognition software, but you definitely aren't talking like that, right? So you're just not in practice of doing that. The moment he says that, look at what happens.
Tell Gregor that and see what happens.
Okay. Okay, please go back to the options. Approve it.
So again, he jumps directly into the details. So I pull him back again.
No, don't worry about that. Start with the intention. Just tell him that you want to create a new method.
Okay. Create a new method in the Rufus class.
This one.
Yes. Oh, okay. Already has the right parameter because IntelliJ does it for you.
So in this situation, Marco knows exactly what he wants to do. He's just not used to saying it at that high a level, right? Like there's a joke that I learned when I was growing up about, there's these two people in the Army and one of them wants to get promoted. I'm not good with the Army, but like to sergeant or something like that. And so they give a test to the two people. And the first person, they're like, you need to put a flagpole up. How do you put a flagpole up? And the person was like, well, so you're going to dig the hole, you're going to set the concrete, you're going to raise the pole, you're going to brace it, you're going to let it sit. That's how you put the flagpole up. And they ask the second person, they say, how do you put the flagpole up? And he says, soldier, put that flagpole up. And that's the person who gets promoted, right? Because like your job here is to talk at a much higher level. Like in the Star Trek world, this is where Picard says, make it so, right? Like you're not looking at the details. And we're just not used to doing that. We're used to going directly into the details. The moment he comes up to intention, he gets this wonderful gift, which is he is not used to IntelliJ, right? It's not like he's a bad programmer. It's just he's in a completely new place, right? New language, new editor. Gregor, on the other hand, is fantastic with IntelliJ. So the moment that he says it at the high level, he gets to discover a better way of doing something than he ever could have given in details. There's no way he could have given those details because he didn't know it existed. And a benefit for me as a coach is that I have a lot of these tricks. Like I've gotten really good at noticing when I say something at a high level and the person does it better than I could have expected it to happen. Stopping and saying, hey, how did that happen? All right, I want to get to the retro for a second and I'm almost out of time because again, I've budgeted badly. But it takes us about half an hour before we start. We get our first test in here. We do commits, by the way, as we go, and committing is a really powerful thing. I want to show you like a 30-second clip of the very last commit we did. So up until this point, the commits that we're doing are occurring in IntelliJ, which is a perfectly fine way of doing commits with Git. However, there's an extra benefit of the GitHub interface, especially for mobbing. So this is happening at 22:24. And what I want you to listen to, like first I'm going to show you what it is. So we're here.
I probably have to close this. So the last.
All right, so we put in the message here. And then you'll notice down here, there's this little person with a plus. So the GitHub interface allows you to add co-authors.
Is empty. So one of the nice things about this is the ability to add co-authors.
And so everyone's going to put in, sorry, let me pause that. Everyone's going to put in their GitHub username. You'll see it. I'm just having each person put their own one in. And then we're going to push it to GitHub. And now what I want you to listen to for the next 30 seconds is not the words. I just want you to listen to the emotions that surfaced during this commit.
So you'll see here, like, it tags it this way. And if you do the commit, you'll actually see it. It's added this way in the commit message in the description. Yeah.
It's a really powerful mechanism in mobbing. Like we're all committing, we're all part of writing this. That is a huge advantage. Like let that surface. And this is the first place that I've seen source control pay attention to the idea that multiple people might have co-authored this code, right? And so it's a fairly obscure aspect of source control, but really, really wonderful to take advantage of. All right. Oh, this next part is gonna suck. Sorry, I timed really badly. We do a retro. We start this right, let's see, first start is mind map shows up about here. So this is 2:28. That gives me about a half hour to do the retro, which I felt would be sufficient. Here we are at time where I actually asked people, like, are we good? And here we are an hour later. Before we're actually done with this, right? A lot happens in the mob. I've just been talking for 2 hours about an activity that only took 2.5 hours to actually be part of. A lot happens, and you need to take some time to bring stuff up and talk about it. And here in the retro, we're not even talking that much about facilitation. Mainly we're talking about, well, first of all, we're talking about tooling. Let me actually bring up this retro. Let's see. There's a link here so we can just go through the actual, that's the facilitation. This one. Mind map. There we go. All right, so this is what came up here. Over here is what happened in the tools. So things that we're noticing or talking about just related to the tools that we're using, because there's a lot of new tools that people are using. These are patterns that we're using. Some of these are about facilitation, but not all of them. The language, so this actually was fairly low. Most of the time I actually have more show up in the language, but I think that's just because we had a self-selecting really good group of people who are pretty, programming wasn't really the problem for anyone. But we did have this new keyword, or not keyword, class optional that was worth pulling out. Things about the domain, right? Which, like I said, we committed to master trunk in a project that nobody was familiar with. We talked about emotions. Oh, so for facilitation, this is really worth talking about. Emotion itself is basically useless. But what emotion is like an interrupt, right? It's telling you something important is going on, but it doesn't tell you what is important or what is going on. It's just telling you something's happening to pay attention to. So the emotion itself is not helpful, but the emotion plus the event that occurred right before the emotion surfaced, that's super helpful, right? So I am feeling happy. That means nothing to me, right? I'm feeling happy because I saw the test pass. That tells me a lot. Happy is something good happened, but it's not something good happened that was expected. That's content. Happy is something surprisingly good happened, right? It's your body saying, pay attention so you can repeat it. So if you're happy because the test passed, that means the tests aren't normally passing for this team, right? And you should talk about that. And you should try to get it so that they continue to see those tests pass, in which case they'll no longer be happy about it. They'll just be content, right? Likewise, fear or anger, mad, sad, glad, shame, these are really important emotions, but they're only important when you tie them to the event. So unlike everything else here, where it's just tell me anything you observed, anytime you felt a strong emotion, I want the emotion, but I also want what happened right before the emotion. So we can talk about what is that emotion trying to alert us to. The emotion itself is useless. It's the emotion gives us insight into the event that happened right before it, right? And that's why you'll see, like, I have fear here twice, right? Because one was fear on when they were talking, the other one was fear when they saw the code base. Those are completely different things that are being alerted, right? So anytime you get the emotion, you get the thing as well. I am doing this just as a mind map. There's a couple of things that are really great on the mind map for remote facilitation. And one of them is, you will notice how this mind map changes. So first of all, just physically, it looks different. Like right here, I'm fine using just the default mind map, but at some point it just gets too big and I have to move it to productivity mode because I just need more words on the screen. But you'll also notice, like, look at me moving things around on the map. You can actually see the map. Like it starts out here and then like I'm adding things, I'm growing them. I knew about mind maps my whole life, but it wasn't until I was introduced to digital mind maps that I was able to see them not just as a way of collecting information, but as a way of organizing information. And that ability, so as a facilitator, part of your job is going to be to organize the insights that are coming up in the observations that are coming up in the retro. And if you do that, very often more insights will show up, right? So people are good at sort of seeing plot holes. And when they see like, oh, this one is empty, they'll say, oh, well, what did I notice in IntelliJ, right? The best advice I can give you is never skip the retro. It's a really important thing. When I first learned about doing retros as a facilitator, well, first learned is the wrong word. When I first realized the importance, I was training other people to be facilitators at a company. And I told them to make sure to always do the retro. I myself did not always do the retro because I was such a good facilitator. Like, I didn't really need the retro to, like, but they were brand new. So I made them always do the retros because one thing I knew is you're never gonna mess up by doing too many retrospectives. That is not a thing. So I was making them doing, and then all of a sudden these new people were being better than I were. Like they were getting better results than I was getting. And that's when I realized maybe I'm not as good of a facilitator as I realized. Like people need the retros. There's the event of doing things. And then there's the event of realizing that you've done things. You need both of those. I usually do the retro right at the end of each session I do. Yeah.
How often do you do the retros?
At the end of each session. So most of the time I'm doing 2-hour sessions with a group. So I'm doing at the end of every 2 hours.
Okay.
If I'm in a team that is doing full-time mobbing, we usually do retros twice a day. So once right before lunch, once right before we go home. They are not usually this long.
Is it time box?
So usually it takes around 15 minutes to do the retro. But remember what I said about 0 to 1? So I was thinking half an hour was me giving extra time. I was obviously way wrong about that. It took an hour and a half. But my hunch is if we did a retro the next time, it would be closer to the 15-minute mark because we would be bringing in the things that are new since yesterday, right? And there's only 2 hours. The thing that happened here is this was the things that were new, period, right? So it just took more time. That's great. Like there was nothing wrong taking the hour and a half. It was fully, like it was worth spending that time. I think both me and the rest of the team got a lot of value from it. They stayed an hour over on a 3-hour session. So that's gotta be like a plus right there. But when you do them frequently, they usually last 10 to 15 minutes. A style
sorry, after you, Esther.
One thing that I like with the retros is that they together with timing, speaking time, are the two things that build group intelligence. If you look at research, the two things that make a group intelligent is that people learn how to read others' emotion or are good at it. So I think the retro is also good for the team, not only the facilitator. You practice noticing other people and how they feel and how they react. So I don't know if it's been any research on it, but it looks like mob programming could actually build group intelligence.
So I don't think there's any scientific research on this, but I have found mobbing to be the best way to group team intelligence. Like people go to these group team building activities where you fall into each other and stuff. You know what is a really good way to build team? Work together as a team. Turns out working together as a team is a great way to build a team. And so I have seen just remarkable results from mob programming turning teams around. Better than any other thing I've ever seen is just working as a team. And teams that actually trust each other, teams that actually are really high performing, usually 20 times higher performing than the same team before they were mob programming. That's an incredible increase, right? And the retro is a big part of that. The other part that's really big about that, which I haven't talked about because this is more on the facilitation than the intro to mobbing, but is the working agreements of kindness, consideration, and respect. And depending on your team, you might have to be very forceful with that and very overt about saying it. Yeah.
And that fits into the hedonistic balance that they've seen is the predictor of if pair programming work or not.
Yeah, I've seen teams that don't work with kindness, consideration, and respect, and you can literally set a clock before that team disintegrates.
But they've also had studies on pairs that done assignments predefined so that it can actually measure the result from the pair programming.
Yeah.
And how kind they were to each other, also with back channeling, like nodding and showing that they listen and that they, all of that, psychological safety things.
Yeah.
That was the sole predictor of their success. And when you look at groups, kindness is more important than being clever.
Yes. Yeah. And we know that also from the Archidemi study from Google. Mm-hmm. Can you put links to that study in the notes?
Yeah.
I'd love to read it. There was someone else who had a question earlier. I didn't see who.
René had a question, right?
Yes, indeed. Regarding the length of the retro, usually I would, you said it might be shortened to 15 minutes after the next session. What I would like to know is, usually I'd say this is because the people are unexperienced, but I just recognized, or the people joining this particular session seem to be very experienced with retrospectives, and nonetheless it took that long for the first time. So it is.
Oh no. That's the opposite.
Okay.
The more experienced you are, the longer the retro is going to go, not the quicker. Because the way the retro goes really quick is no one says anything.
Okay. Okay.
That's a really quick retro. So the more experienced you are, in fact, a tool that I use a lot, so not a lot, but sometimes when I'm with my teams, they don't notice anything. And so there's a tool that you can use if they don't notice called visual thinking strategies. And visual thinking strategies is an absolutely excellent exercise coming from the art world that will build your ability to notice and articulate things. It's used to train spies. It's used to train grade school kids. It is absolutely amazing. And so in teams where they're not when every time I do the retro, they don't see anything, I will make them do a VTS for 10 minutes at the beginning of each session just to build it. We are over time already. If you are interested, I can show you the VTS, but I'll just explain it really quick. So you won't have the experience of it unless you vote that you want to do that. VTS, visual, there we go. So the basic idea is you get a piece of art. Here they have it nicely split up, which is a nice technique, but usually what I do is I just go to Google and say art, images, and then I try to pick something I haven't seen before. Let's take this one. And then we just look at this picture. And it can be a photo or it can be a picture, like it doesn't matter. And I just say, tell me what you see in the photo, right? And then people will say things like, you know, she looks sad. Now that's an inference, right? So then my job as facilitator is to say, what do you see that makes you think that she's sad? And they might say something like, well, it's colorful all around her, but she's all black and gray. Right? Or they might say the opposite. They might say, you know, it's colorful all around her, but she's all black and gray, which is not an inference, it's just a fact. In which case it's my job as the facilitator to ask for the reverse of that. So what does that infer? To which they might say like, she's sad, or it might just show that like, you know, they're trying to show how she stands out in the world, or it might say that like, oh, she just sees the rest of the world as beautiful, right? All of these are inferences, but the fact that there are rainbow colors around her and that she is black and gray, that is an actual fact, right? So your job as facilitator is if they give you facts, ask for inferences from those facts. If they give you inferences, ask for the facts that gave them that. And that's the entire exercise. I set a 10-minute timer and you go. And you think, even with a picture this simple, that like you would be done seeing things in it like a minute in. And if you do it by yourself, you probably are. If you do it in a group, you will continue to grow and continue to see things throughout the 10 minutes. It's actually quite amazing. And then over time, like think of this again as push-ups. Over time, your group will just start to see things. Right? They'll start to notice the things that are actually there. And like I said, like here we have it as and this is a painting. I say that because look at the way the strokes go. It's obviously not photographic, but it could be digital, but I don't think it is because look at the way the canvas, you have these like pieces where it looks like the canvas is coming through underneath. So I guess this would be probably a watercolor. But you can do this like with just a photo as well. And let's take something, photo, black and white. Let's take this one. Okay, that's weird. Open image in new tab. Nope, it doesn't want me to do that, but I can always do that. Oh no, that you don't actually see when I make that bigger, do you? That just scrolls up in my screen. So in this photo, you would be surprised of the amount of information that is just in this photo, right? That people won't state even though they know, right? So anyhow, my point being like VTS is a wonderful technique to make it so your teams can see things and give you better retros. And so if you're working with a team and they're not noticing things, this is an amazing exercise to do with the team that will actually start making your retros become richer.
Llewellyn, was the other website you were showing us, was it just an example of another art?
No, no, this is the actual people who developed this whole curriculum and technique. I'm in the wrong thing here. here.
I pasted it already in the.
Oh,
in the
okay,
book.
great. All right. I feel like we're kind of coming to a close. Are there any other questions before we pull this in? All right.
There was a question in the comments quite some time ago.
Oh.
In hearing your perspective.
Oh, wow. Lots of stuff in the chat.
Yeah, I've collected a couple of them. So Marco was pointing out switching the driver speed was awesome. I can agree. Yeah, I definitely noticed that as well. Also because of the cloud instance. Bob Allen was asking, so Llewellyn, you were functioning as both product person and facilitator. I think he left already.
Yeah. So like one of the places where I handling as product owner is occurring. Let me check my, oh, now the chat is blocking my notes. After they do the first one, we're about to make the first commit. I'm not happy with the way the API is, right? Now, I hold that back until we get to the actual commit, just like we do with the video game, right? Go as far as they're gonna go, but before I commit this to my main branch, I'm gonna make sure that it's something that I'm happy with. So at that point, I become product owner, right? And I make them fix 3 things. It doesn't take very long. Let's see, first commit is around 32, I think. But so let me go find that one. 32. Yeah, so right around here. No, we do this, we do this, we do this one right in here. So up here, where we have approval text writer, that's not the API I want. I actually want to just take an approval writer. Down here, yeah, so we can see that right here, right before the commit. Right here, it's taking a string. I want it to take an object. And then to string that object. And then there's one other thing where there's a name I want them to change. Here on reporter, we change that to get reporter. That entire process takes about 2 minutes, and it's in lieu of doing a pull request and what's that called when you review the other person's code?
Code review.
Code review, yes. It's in lieu of a code review, right? Like it's also in lieu of testing, right? Like because I'm part of this process, I know that I'm getting what I want. And if I'm not getting what I want, I can correct it right there. And that stops a whole bunch of meetings and talking and cycles that would otherwise happen. That stops me doing a pull request, them waiting on that code, actually making it into the main branch. It stops when it goes in the main branch, me not realizing because there are so many things that changed in the pull request that this was an issue, discovering it later, creating a new task, bringing it into our backlog grooming meeting, voting on how long that task is going to take, assigning it. That entire thing is gone, and it's replaced with like 2 minutes of me saying, nope, nope, no. Like, that's what I want. I've seen a variation of this when we had an artist sit with our group, and we put an icon that he had on the thing, and it was the wrong size. And so we resized it because we know how to do that in HTML. And he was like, what have you done to my icon? And we're like, we put it at the right size. And he was like, no. And he like whips out his laptop, which had Photoshop on it. The only computer in the team that had Photoshop, not that that would have mattered because none of us knew how to use Photoshop anyways, immediately fixed the graphic and sent it to us, and we put it in. it changes the conversation from whose fault is it that this was wrong to, look, we got what we wanted. It's really powerful. Have your product owner sit with the mob. You'll get much better results.
Actually, I think that's quite an interesting point. We do the same thing with our graphic designer, but we haven't done it with our product owner yet. I think the reason is, we have 3 product owners, by the way, but that's a completely different issue. The reason is they're not used to see code. So I don't think they could give us the same immediate feedback, or it's more like we would bore them. They have to wait a long time till we can show them something.
So let me give you 2 examples of this. One is from the original mobs at Hunter. And they had a rule that they actually, the original mob at Hunter serviced about 20 different teams, right? They could release about 4 times a day to production. And so their rule that they established was, if you want us to work on your story, you have to come and sit with us, or while we're working on your story, you need to respond to each email within 2 minutes. And if you're not willing to do that, we won't work on your stories, which they couldn't have done in the very beginning, because people would be like, screw you, like, I'm not wasting my day on you. But at the moment that they were like, they started releasing frequently, people were like, so you're saying that if I sit with you this morning, it will be in my warehouse this afternoon? I'll do that. Like, let me come thither. And those people were not programmers. They had never seen code before. They don't need to be. And they didn't actually join the mob, right? They were welcome to. And I actually think it's better if they do. But you can sit with the mob if you don't join it. It's not as powerful, but it still works. But they would see, like, because as we're programming, we'd pull, you'd pull up the screens, you'd click on the buttons, right? They would see things that didn't work. Likewise, I had 2 business analysts who would sit with the mob out in Washington. And they sat with us for 2 reasons. One, the mob was in this corner way in the back. And I think, like, when they sat with us was the only time they actually got to do real work and weren't pushed into a meeting. I think they just enjoyed that fact. So most of the time they're there on their laptop. But the other thing is, very often we would stop and ask them a question. And literally every time this happened, like every 5-minute conversation we had saved them at least an hour of meetings, right? And so, like, I remember this one time we were working on fiscal weeks. Now, fiscal weeks don't work the same way as a regular week works. And they're designed to work so that, like, the fiscal weeks always start on the same day, right? And I forget if it's a Sunday or a Monday. I think it's a Monday. I could be wrong. Anyhow, and it allows you to compare against different years in a much more businessy way. But it means that some years have more than 52 fiscal weeks, meaning more than 365 days, which of course an actual year doesn't have. And so when we discovered that, and we're doing SQL queries, it's really hard in a SQL query to say, get these 2 rows, but if this one row contains something different, then get a 3rd row. Like, that's hard to do in a SQL query, right? It's not that hard to do in programming. It's just not, SQL isn't designed to do that. And so the first question we had is, like, what the heck is going on? How do we have more than 365 days, right? How is our fiscal day like this? And so they explained that to us. And then we sort of said, okay, but the ones that are more than 365, like, we're trying to compare them against last year. Do you mind if we go a week earlier, right? Because it's really easy to subtract 6 from your thing and put a cap on it in SQL. And he's like, yeah, I don't care. And we're like, that will save us at least 3 hours of programming, right? And so very often they make decisions with no understanding of the consequences. And the moment it comes up in the programming and we can sort of say, is this actually important? Like, you get a better result. So they don't have to actually even participate in the mob. They just can sit next to the mob and it will be enough. But you do get better results if they participate. But that can be a lot for people. So, you know, figure out the one that works best for you. Any other questions? There's a whole bunch of stuff it looks like I missed here.
Yeah, there were a couple of people pointing things out and adding more information. Adi was mentioning that Chris Metz calls I think he was referring to the giving space for the not so experienced coworker.
Yeah.
He calls it staff for skills liquidity.
Staff liquidity. Yes.
Yeah. And that also goes to just not only a team that is cross-functional, right, but like a team that has code ownership, right, where it's like everybody can step up. And that means, and again, if you watch in the video, see places where like I'm leaving the room, where other people are leaving the room, like it's not a big deal. Like you can be sick, you can deal with something that's come up, and the team can still continue to function. And then when you're done, you can come back in, and that can be, you know, 10 minutes later, an hour later, a day later, 2 weeks later, a month later. Like you can take the time to work as an actual person as well as a programmer on your team. And the original mob, one of the places, so obviously Europe is much better about this than the US, but in the US, paternity leave is not a really well done thing, right? And so one of the things the mob did is when Chris had his first son, they he worked at home for something like 4 or 5 months, which is crazy amounts of paternity leave in the US. And, you know, very often in there, he would just have to mute and go and deal with whatever is happening with his kid, right? And that is exactly the right thing to do, right? Like, it's good that he could stay home. It was good that he could take care of his child. It's good that he could jump out and actually take care of his child when he needed it. And that was enabled because his team could function, even though he was the team lead and the sharpest programmer there. Like his team could still function really, really well with him not there. And so that allowed him to be able to mesh these two parts of his life. It's really important.
Esther was mentioning the building the rotation order depending on the personalities of the team. Was that right?
Yeah. Yeah, I have a very mixed team that I'm doing mobbing with right now. So I try to construct the rotation order beforehand, thinking about so that there's always one in the pair that knows the syntax, for example. And things like that. Is that something that you also have tried or
yes.
Comments on?
So I didn't do that here because I had no idea who these people were. Mm-hmm. No, just nothing bad about the people, just I hadn't met them yet. However, I have been in places, so like one way I will do that is if we're doing like a new language, and like half of the group knows the language and half of the group doesn't know the language, or half the group has never programmed before, I will intersperse. So it's not 5 people who know Java followed by 5 people who've never programmed Java. Like that does not work very well. So interspersing them that way works. Or if you have like, you know, 3 people who are completely new to programming and another 7 people who are not, don't put the 3 people group together, intersperse them. So I will do that. I've also had to separate people, for lack of a better word. Usually the reason that occurs is because they are working really horribly together and they need to be able to work on the same team, but not right next to each other for a considerable amount of time before they can learn to work together, right? So it's not like you want to separate them forever, but you might want to separate them for like a couple of weeks then have them try a day together, then like sort of stretch and fold, to get that in. And then sometimes you have to do it for the exact opposite reason. Sometimes you have two people who work too well together, and what you want is the entire team to work well together. And so you need to actually separate them to do that. Most of the time, all of this is happening more with teams that I know as opposed to new teams. But yeah.
You were mentioning the C++ mobbing session a couple of months ago, and I just wanted to point out, I think one of the real highlights was that so we had this very manual task of replacing the pragma at the top of each file, and then Bernard was helping us figuring out how to do it automated with a regex search to replace it in all files. Yeah, that was really the learning, really like the learning part of, and automating it immediately part of mob programming.
So this is something that shows up a lot when I'm just talking about the intro to mob programming that I'll mention. A lot of times people have done something akin to mob programming when they had a really hard problem. The way they usually describe this is a war room situation. So something bad occurred and the entire team got into a conference room and they put the code up on the screen and they programmed together to do it. It's usually less structured than the mob that we're doing, but it's still like that's like the experience that a lot of people sort of had if they've never heard of mob programming. And the advantage of that is that when you are working on a hard problem, you can solve something as a team that you cannot solve as individuals, right? So the win is that you win the problem, that you solve the problem that otherwise you couldn't solve. And a lot of times people mention this as a reason not to mob when things are really easy. I very much disagree with this. But when you mob on something easy, you will figure out ways to innovate that problem, right? And that's what you're describing. Like we were doing this thing repetitively and we got to a point, like in the first couple rounds, we're just learning how to do it. So it's not quite yet repetitive, but by like the third, fourth, fifth time that we're doing it, it is now repetitive. And usually a mob will innovate that to make it disappear, right? So if you're spending a lot of time doing trivial things, like you should almost definitely put mobbing in place because you will start fixing those problems so that you start spending your time doing interesting things, right? Like we are programmers. We shouldn't be spending most of our time doing trivial things. Our job is to automate that stuff away. So just recognize that like a really big win of doing an easy problem in a mob is that you don't just try to get through it. You try to make that problem disappear.
I see a couple of hands raising there. Are there any other questions?
Just forgot to lower my hand from before.
Okay, I counted it anyway. Yeah, do you want to add something, Llewellyn?
Just a second, maybe.
Just a second.
It seems my audio wasn't on before. There was another question in the comments, also from Esther Daniel, on the question of probably how do you decide when to vote versus letting the navigator or talker just make a decision and continue with that? Because that's also I think in the session constraints for the Global Day of Mob Retreat, actually having the navigator decide is one of the sessions. So I'm curious as to how that
So
Why do you
I
think?
almost always want the navigator to decide to try something, right? When we've tried multiple things, I then want to do the vote. So in terms of like, if the navigator wants to try something, that's what we're doing, right? Now, because I'm on a very short, oh, I didn't even talk about this. Let's talk about timings for a moment. So here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people, I think. I might have miscounted that. A lot of times when people talk about timing, what they're thinking about is, okay, how long is this person going to sit at the computer, right? Is 4 minutes enough at the computer? Is 10 minutes enough at the computer? I think that is a bad question. A much better question, I think, is how long is it going to be before this guy gets back to the computer, right? And at 4 minutes and 10 people, it's 40 minutes before this person is back at the computer. Like that is the edge of what I can take, right? And still be engaged in the mob, right? Probably at a mob this size, I want to get closer to 3 minutes, 2 minutes. At 2 minutes, it's 20 minutes till he's back at the computer. That's a better time cycle, right? In a global day of code retreat, when we would do mobs in person, usually we did 2-minute mobs because literally just getting everyone to the computer in 40 minutes required a 2-minute mob, right? Because you just like, you at least want one chance to get to the keyboard. My point being, pay a lot more attention to what is the time between getting to the computer rather than the time at the computer. Like, yeah. So the point being, like, when you're at the computer, you're not going to have enough time to finish your idea. So when a new idea comes into play, we start it because we're going to try all ideas. And so if the navigator's there and he's got an idea, go with it. Once that finishes, right, if people still have things, push that up, pull those ideas in. Once you've tried all the ideas and you need to decide which one you like, that's when you vote. And the reason to do that is to really encourage everyone to submit their ideas, right? You don't have to justify them. You don't have to convince us. Just tell us, we'll try it, and then we'll decide if we like it. So try everything. And if you're the one navigating, try first. Yeah. Esther?
I have a question on timers then, because I watched a recording of Woody talking about remote mobbing from like March, April sometime, when he said that one way to make it work remote is to allow more time. And inspired by that, I set my team's timer for 10 minutes to try.
Yeah.
And it was awesome.
Huh?
We had a switch on commit.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, there were only like 6 people.
Mm-hmm.
And we had 2 hours. Yeah. But I haven't seen them as like engaged before because it felt like we didn't have these constant context switching. But it could also be because it's a quite new team to this. So it could be you're like from 0 to 1, but at a longer scale.
Yeah, so there's a couple things at play. So one is 10 minutes is a long time, right? But you're still within the realms of acceptable. My hunch is that your switching might have been a little bit taken time, right? Like, so between when one person was at keyboard to the next person, maybe in the neighborhood of like 30 seconds to a minute. Does that sound correct? So this goes to just a general cycle time. I'm about to show you something weird. But you've been sitting with me for like more than 2 hours, so you should be expecting something weird. That's that's my word. Let's take a look at jigsaw puzzles. Did that pop up somewhere? There we go. Okay. So this is me doing a jigsaw puzzle. I like jigsaw puzzles. And I want to show you feedback. Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna watch this video. Hopefully without sound, if there's a way to do that. I have no idea what the actual sound is down here. I apologize for whatever might occur.
No, this is like a Saturday Night video.
Normally I just mute my computer. Oh, maybe I can do that here.
You're getting very crazy about this. It's cute. You don't even have to talk to him. Okay. If I come into the frame, I can see.
I'm sorry. Let's do that. All right. So anyhow, you see the first part here. I'm taking the pieces and I'm trying them out. So I've done the first half. It takes me 36 seconds. I'm now going to do the second half. When I do this one, I take the piece out and I'm bringing it to the pieces. I'm actually undoing work right now to do this. I'm assuming you can still hear me even though I muted my computer. So down here, oh, thank you. So now I'm bringing it to each of the pieces. I find the piece that matches and I'm bringing them both back. And that entire process only takes me 19 seconds. And so let's look at the lean graph of what's going on in this situation. I can unmute now. Okay, so in the first thing, it takes me half of a second to test the piece. That's the actual work that I'm doing. And then it takes me 3.5 seconds to move the piece back and forth between the thing. That is a total of 4 seconds. And then I do that 9 times, which gives me a total of 36 seconds. In the second one, I actually spend 10 seconds not doing work, removing work from the puzzle. I still take the same half a second to do work, but then I take half a second to move between the pieces. That piece gets recycled 9 times. So 10 plus 1 times 9, or 10 plus 9 for 19 seconds. Meaning that, like, taking 10 minutes out of 36 seconds ends up still saving me almost 16 seconds, right? All of this goes to when you're in a repetitive thing, you need to pay attention to like your cycles. And so if you have 1 minute to switch who's at the keyboard and you do a 1 minute timer, 50% of the time you spend together is useless, right? That's obviously not okay. This is also the same graph is why really quick TDD cycles and really quick test times are important, right? Because if it takes you a minute to run your tests, then you're going to try to do like 10 minutes of coding before you run your test, right? But if you can run your test in 1 second, then you might only do 15 seconds of coding before you run your test, right? And so if it takes a while to do the switch, you're going to want to do longer cycle times so that you get a better ratio of programming versus switching. One thing that we had going for us a lot is with AnyDesk, our switching time was really low. So we were able to have a shorter rotation time, which I find to be better. Another thing that you talked about was switching on commit, which I think you mean committed, put it there, but what also means switch on finishing of an activity. Now I do mobs sometimes that way, especially when I'm doing learning with a technique called Cohen's. And the advantage of it is a sense of accomplishment, which is great. The disadvantage of it is sort of the same thing, right? Like it has a tendency to leave, I did this section, you did this section, you did this section. Whereas when it's more fluid, it's just we all wrote the code, right? No one has particular ownership of the particular piece. The other thing is you can cover in that situation for the people who are in the mob not really understanding what's going on because the thought got completed before it went to the next person. And it feels good, but I think you're losing a longer term win of us all understanding, and you're losing a little bit of the it's okay not to be done, which is something that's very hard for people to become comfortable with. It like being okay trying something and failing, being okay not finishing something, being okay not knowing where we're going. Like these are things that really take practice and are deeply uncomfortable to people. Yeah.
We did make an exception and push code that didn't work.
Nice.
So it could be half a test or a failing test or something like that.
Nice. I saw somewhere in the things about ping pong. There are things that I like about ping pong, but I don't like it as a general way of mobbing. The thing in particular that I like about ping pong pairing is that it systematically makes you learn to talk through the intention of your tests. And so if nobody knows how to do that, ping ponging itself can teach you how to do that in TDD thing. But if you have people who know how to make their tests speak with intention, I find it more effective just to work together as a team. Right, but I do care about tests a lot, and having them be driving behavior. Anything else? Yep.
I had one more question about when to stop the mob from doing stupid things. And not like stupid things, this will hurt in an hour or two, or stupid things, these are stupid things that some companies still don't understand are stupid things. Like mostly writing integration tests, for example.
So, okay, so there's okay, let's take the integration test as an example because it's easier to talk to it specifically. There's two reasons you might mostly write an integration test. And most probably the reason is you don't know how to write it not as an integration test, right? The other reason is you enjoy pain. So let's take for right now that probably the issue is they don't know how to. At some point, you're going to need to stop them and introduce, and this goes to that, like, let's stop and learn new things, right? So you're going to play as a coach role in this place, but you're going to introduce, how would I structure this test so that it wasn't an integration test, right? That's actually something that we almost did in the mob yesterday, but we didn't have enough time. Like even the test that we were writing was closer on the integration test. Like for the people who are in the mob, this will make sense what I'm about to say, and for the rest of the people, just sorry. But for the test where we test that the normal reporter was done, that could have been tested with just options.getReporter and check that it gave us back a non-null result, right? We didn't actually have to throw the exception and stuff. Anyhow, we didn't have enough time to get to that because again, it's just a demo mob. It's not, you know, in real working scenario, if you don't get to something today, it doesn't matter because you work tomorrow, right? Like the session doesn't actually end, like we're still employed. So you always sort of have time. That's sort of a nice luxury of doing stuff at work is you feel like you're always under a deadline, but the truth is we're going to be here next month and next year. Like, you know, we've got time. So stopping them to introduce a better way of doing it, that's a really good thing to do. Now, do you do that before they experience the integration pain or after? Is slightly dependent on what your level is with the team. So from a kind person perspective, there is a desire to do it before they go and feel this unnecessary pain. However, you might end up cheating yourself by doing that because you do that and then they don't really appreciate what you did. So sometimes you need to let them do one or two or maybe even a few integration tests and really sit with that pain and then show them the better way, and then they will come over. But do realize, and this is important, sometimes you need to, if I'm used to hitting myself, right, it stops hurting. And then when I do something new, even if it doesn't hurt, it can still cause pain because just I'm doing something new. So sometimes you need to make them try new things a couple times until we get past 0 to 1, and so they can actually do it. And then they can decide, oh, I don't like that other thing. And so as coach, you have to play with this. Have I gotten them to the point that they understand it well enough that they can make a decision? Now, for me personally, so I mentioned at the very top of the hour that I'm a technical coach, right? And so, like I say, companies hire me to sit with their programmers and work with them. And I do this in 2-week increments for 2 hours a day per team. I do it slightly differently now that we're in pandemic. So a lot of times I'm only working 1 team a day, and because you can do that because you don't have to travel. But in real life, I usually work 3 teams a day, but I only work each team for 2 hours a day, but every single day for 2 weeks. And that's long enough to do a behavioral change. What I do when I'm working with the teams is I do something called a learning hour. And a learning hour is an hour where we learn stuff that isn't part of production code. So in the situation that you are describing, what I would probably do is not introduce it during the team that when I'm working with them, if it's too big of a stretch. But I would instead introduce it in the learning hour where they can start to get comfortable with the idea without having to commit to the idea. And then I would really pay attention to the first time I hear them suggest at all that they should do it. And then I would encourage the fuck out of that, right? Like, so you see the idea and then you wait till you hear it come back and then you support. But you need to have that mechanism where you can do things that don't actually matter, right? And learning hour is an excellent mechanism for that. And I use it a lot when I coach as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We have that as well.
Nice.
Yeah. So a sneaky approach where you see something they do that you know there's a better way to do this, you can wait, and then you can introduce something in the learning hour concept that you know will solve a problem that they don't know they have.
Yeah.
And you tell them, please try this a couple of times. It's a nice technique to know. And you hope that they will discover that that's the solution of the problem that they will have if they don't fix it.
Yeah, so sneaky is exactly the right word that I would use. Another way I use this is technologies. I use this a lot with technologies, right? So I'm with a team that's still using SVN, right? Nothing I say is going to change that. But if we do an hour on Git, that will not change anything because Git is super confusing. If you do an hour of Git practice, you leave saying this thing sucks. So then you have to wait like a week and you have to do a second hour on Git. And then they're like, oh yeah, no, I'm starting to get Git. And then you have to wait again, like a month to 6 months. But that patience will pay off and they will come to you at some point and say, this project would be great for Git. Can you help us do it? And then you just have to support. It's so much easier to support than to convince. And so, yeah, like I do this a lot with technologies. Let's learn IDEs during our learning hour. Let's learn TDD during our learning hour. I used TDD during our learning hours at a company that had a 10-minute compile time in Java that Eclipse and IntelliJ wouldn't even compile the code to get them to appreciate the value of compile on keystroke and eventually get their Eclipse and IntelliJ configured so it would actually work and their full compile cycle down to a minute, which is still really long, but significantly better than 10 minutes. And the fact that like on Keystroke, and the fact that IntelliJ and Eclipse were actually compiling when they did it meant most of the time they were getting immediate feedback. They never realized that TDD was teaching them to appreciate that. But them realizing it wouldn't have helped me at all. Like, yeah. Any other things?
We were mentioning mob retreat a couple of times, and I'm not sure if everybody knows the concept. So
does I'm not even sure if everyone knows the concept of code retreat. So let's start there, because that is a wonderful thing. Dimitri, are you actually running the mob retreat?
Yes, actually, I've come up with this idea, so maybe I could
do you want to explain
about it? But,
yeah.
Yeah. And now?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, actually, mob retreat is a whole day of practice in mob programming in sessions. And the idea is that at the end of the exercise, you as facilitator see how your mob groups are growing up to self-organizing, self-facilitating teams. And to achieve this, you have different sessions with constraints on how they interact, or particularly what is the role of the navigator in the mob. We start with navigator just giving commands, and we call it the commander session. And then the second session is we want more of the mob to come up with their own ideas, and navigator is the chairman, asking questions to the mobs, making decisions, but the ideas should come from the mob. And then we go to the third session, and the third session is navigator is observer, and the mob can discuss freely. We don't have big mobs, so just 4 or 5 people per mob, and therefore if you have one typist and one navigator, the mob is actually 2 to 3 people, but 5 people mob is still a valid size, and so they can communicate, and navigator sees them come into agreement. And therefore in the fourth session you can eliminate the navigator. And the idea is that after all 4 sessions, after the experience of different styles, you can see how the mob can decide which styles fit best at which situation. And you see the mob growing, you see communication skills of each group growing. And then there are some additional ideas. Each time between first, second, and third round, you replace one person in a mob, so that mob always need to accommodate a new person, and they also get this experience. There is some kata. Unlike code retreat, it's always the same code base, so they don't delete the code, they just continue working on it. The kata is big enough so that they can implement different features, and so then align, and they need to, and if you have different groups, and we do it on CyberDojo, probably with different languages, you also need to accommodate people coming from different languages and see how it all works and how the learning works in a mob. So basically, that's are the ideas of the mob retreat. And for this, for facilitating mob retreat, there is a presentation which is shared to everyone who wants to facilitate it. So you don't need to develop the stuff from scratch. It's Creative Commons by attribution, so you can use it as you like. And if you want to try it out, you can always do it. And the Global Day of Mob Retreat is similar to Global Day of Code Retreat, where people across the globe trying the same things and exchanging their experiences later. And the idea is getting spread at this day. Therefore, we've selected one day to be this day. This year, it should be the 18th of July. This Monday, coming Monday, on the 6th of July, there is a facilitated training, and I have posted the link to our Google Doc so that anyone who wants to facilitate or maybe facilitate it can just join this training. There is no registration, just one Zoom link, and then we'll see and look at the presentation and ideas with all time which is needed.
And Dimitri, do you need more facilitators?
Well, facilitators are organized, so there is a mobretreat.org site, and whoever wants to share this exercise with their communities is very, very welcome. Currently, I mean, it's if new communities are getting into it and are getting this experience, it's always great. So we don't need, but we hope that people need it, and then we always welcome people who want to try this exercise.
So if I understood what you said correctly, if you want to facilitate this, you are welcome. But one of the things you have to do is also bring at least a group of people who are interested.
Well, I mean, if you want to join a group of people, you can see which events have been registered so far and find one. And if you want to facilitate your own event for your group of people, online or in presence, both if possible, and we do synchronization over this website, mob-retreat.org.
I will say, like, I really enjoy code retreats. I've done 10 plus of them over the years. They are one of the few places where you really get to practice, and they are wonderful for that.
Yeah, I also wanted to say I really like the idea of the mob retreat. Thanks, Dimitri and Bob Elm, for spreading the ideas and motivating other people for organizing something. I think it's a great idea to have one day where all the groups will post on Twitter and make this thing a little bit more visible to people who are not familiar with that concept.
I can absolutely attest to that, because we are trying to host one of the Global Day of Mob Retreat events, and that caused me to really dive into this and join this session and the one on Monday and so on. So I'm really diving deep into it now, and I can already see how much impact this will also have on my own team. So yeah, thank you very much for organizing that. Perfect.
Cool. Yeah, really great. Thanks, Llewellyn Falco, for the great talk and for the mob session 2 days ago. Yeah, I mean, usually we would move this discussion to some bar or something and continue there. A couple of people already left, but I think, yeah, there are still many people here. So you really see that the topic is really interesting to many people.
Nice. Please use it. Keep in touch. Email me, Twitter, LinkedIn. If you have questions, happy to help. And keep doing it. Keep spreading it. Like, there's so much untapped potential in our industry. There's one thing I wanted to mention. I had enough time to actually look through some of the chat. There's a quote about anger there, which is a nice quote, but I find inaccurate. Kara Mikkel, I always mess up her name. Language of emotions. That does not seem right. Language of emotions. This lady, what is it? Carla. So this book is really good in terms of content, not so good in terms of writing. But anger is actually, most people see anger as a very negative emotion. Anger is your subconscious pattern matching. Something is important to me, very important to me, and it's being threatened, right? The way that we react to anger is usually like a strategy that we developed when we were less than 1 year old. And it's just a really bad strategy. Like, so most of our strategy for when I feel anger is kill the thing that's threatening me. That turns out to be really a horrible strategy. And so as we grow up, what we usually try to do is just suppress that feeling, right? But that is not the only way. Anger gives you energy, right? Like, so one of the things you'll notice is when you're angry, you are very energetic. That's because your subconscious not only passes the emotion to you, but it also gives you a boost of adrenaline, which is quite a powerful drug. You can use that energy in much more constructive ways, right? First of all, you can use your analytical brain to find out, am I actually being threatened? Sometimes something looks like a threat, but isn't a threat, right? Second, you can ask yourself like, yeah, okay, you can kill the thing that's threatening you, but you could also make it so the thing that's being threatened is stronger, right? Like, I don't care if a butterfly dive bombs me, like, it's not gonna hurt me, it's just cute, right? I can make the thing I care about stronger so it's not vulnerable to the thing that's threatening it, right? Or I can use that energy to make the thing I care about systematically stronger, right? So like, maybe I care that like my kid is being bullied. I can do things that makes it so my kid is stronger, so he doesn't, like, he does not get bullied as much. Not like that he's stronger, like physically stronger, but like emotionally stronger, like more confidence, thing like that. But I also can make it just systematically, so bullying in general is less accepted in society or at my school or in my classroom or in my peer group or my kids' peer group, right? My point being that like, there are more reactions to anger than just kill the bully. But my kid not getting bullied, that is important. I don't want to ignore that emotion. That emotion is important and it's telling me something. What I want to do is use that information more productively. And I think a lot of times, because we are so bad at dealing with emotions, we confuse the message with the reaction. And so we try to like suppress the messenger. Anger is a great emotion. Like, it tells you something's important to you and it tells you that you need to act. The problem is how we act, not that we act. So anyhow, that's a lengthy ramble on a single comment there, but I've found this to be very useful when I've learned better ways of listening to my emotions. Yeah. All right. Well, on that weird note, probably a good place to end. All right. Thank you everyone for staying with me, and have a great day.
Thank you very much for
In
the
terms of the
good
Google
session.
Doc,
Thanks.
thank you. I will leave the Google Doc up. In about an hour or two, I'll switch it to read only. So there's still a little bit of time if you want to add things, do things on there, and then I'll just make it so it's read only for forever. All right. Take care.
Okay. Thanks everybody for joining. Thanks for the great talk. Yeah, you know already the meetup group. Join the Global Day of Code retreat. There will be an Austrian one, a couple of German ones, US one. Yeah, and stay in touch.
Thank you very much. See you.
Right. Bye.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.